Hello, I am Jordan Ball of Ball Legal Solutions. I would like to talk today about why one needs to have a will, even if a trust is being put into place to handle the transfer of assets at death. This question is frequently asked by attendees at my estate planning seminars and by clients as we are going over the documents I have prepared as part of their estate plan. Frankly, I think the question often reflects some skepticism, and that if one is paying to create a revocable trust, which is supposed to do all sorts of wonderful things, including the transfer of assets while avoiding probate, why is it necessary to even have a will? The answer is a bit easier for those clients who have minor children, as the will is a document in which the parent can name someone to serve as guardian of the children after the parent has died. However, for the majority of my clients, whose children are now grown, the short answer is that if everything is done correctly and matters are properly followed up upon, there will never be a need for the will, and its preparation will ultimately prove to be an unnecessary effort. However, things do not always go according to plan, and an estate plan must always be constructed keeping in mind that the unanticipated often happens, and to the extent possible, the documents must be able to deal with unforeseen events. The goal, of course, is to draft the living trust and have that document control the use and distribution of all one's property, with any specific exceptions being identified and taken into account. However, the trust terms can only control property that has been placed into the trust. Unfortunately, the most detailed, well-drafted, and expensive trust has no effect if no property has been transferred to it. During the initial estate planning process, when your attorney prepares your estate planning documents, he or she should either oversee the transfer of your assets to the trust or provide clear guidance as to what steps are necessary to place your assets there. Unfortunately, it is all too common that clients leave an attorney's office with a folder full of impressive-looking documents, thinking that all necessary work has been done, and neglect to complete the task of transferring the assets into the trust. Years later, after death, it is discovered that the trust is basically an empty basket. Even when the assets are originally placed in the revocable trust, they can fall out over time. For example, I once was assisting a surviving spouse, whom I will refer to as Cindy, with the administration of her husband's estate. It was a late-in-life marriage for both of them. Over a decade before, the husband had hired an attorney to prepare a revocable trust, and that attorney had properly prepared a deed placing the home into the trust. Several years later, he decided to downsize, selling the home and purchasing a small condo with about half the proceeds, and placing the remaining funds into a new bank account. However, he neglected to have the condo deed made to the trust, or to have the new bank account titled into the name of the trust. Therefore, when he passed away, those assets were not subject to the instructions contained in the trust for the use and distribution of his property. Because this situation occurs all too frequently, I always insist that, in addition to the trust, one have what is termed a pour-over will. This is a last will and testament that simply leaves any property in one's estate to the trust. So, any property that was never placed into the trust or has fallen out of the trust ownership over time will eventually be placed into the trust and be subject to its provisions. Fortunately for Cindy, her husband's attorney had prepared just such a pour-over will. When he passed away, it was necessary for her to probate her husband's will, qualify as executor, and administer those assets, actions that would not have been necessary if the property had been titled in the trust. This was not the best possible result, of course. To the extent probate avoidance was an important goal of the trust, there is obviously frustration of purpose. However, the situation would have been much worse if there had not been a pour-over will. In Cindy's case, because both her stepchildren had done quite well financially, her husband, through his trust, had left all his property to Cindy during her life for her support. If there had been no pour-over will, all those proceeds, which exceeded $300,000 and were the bulk of his estate, would have been distributed 1/3 to Cindy, and 2/3 to her stepchildren. It would have placed a significant burden on Cindy, who may have been unable to afford to live the remainder of her life in a comfortable manner. So, as you can see, failure to have the pour-over will in place to serve as a backstop in case property is not titled in the name of the trust at the time of death can have drastic consequences. That is why it will always be included together with any trust that I prepare for my clients. While I always hope that it will prove to be an unnecessary item, I know that depending on that result would be a risky and foolish proposition.